I expect from Rubio to send this message directly to Lavrov. Rubio has to reiterate what Trump said and emphasize the importance and the validity of that statement.
I can talk now to Volodymyr Khandogiy, former Ukrainian Ambassador to London and to NATO. Hello to you, Ambassador.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to the programme. I mean, you listened to President Trump yesterday at the UN saying that Ukraine could take back all of the territories lost to Russia. When you heard that, what went through your mind?
It was a very encouraging statement, actually. And it means a shift in the position of the American administration, in particular of President Trump. But of course, I remain a bit skeptical about that, because we've heard a lot of statements on the part of American president, and some of those statements were not too encouraging. On one hand, on the other hand, that to happen, it means that Ukraine should get a lot more weapons, long-range shells, closed sky, no limits on how deep into Russian territory Ukraine should fire, and many other things. If it is feasible to expect from the United States to participate in that effort, I only can applaud to that statement. It's a very important political backup.
Yeah, okay. And when you say you're skeptical that this line will follow through with action from Donald Trump in terms of more help for Ukraine, and maybe tougher action against Russia, well, you use the word skeptical, many I think might just echo that. When the president of Ukraine said he wanted to see countries around the world end trade with Russia, who was he talking to? Was he talking to India, which buys Russian energy? Was he talking to the European Union, which still buys Russian energy? Who was the message for?
I mean, it's a message to everyone. Of course, it's to European countries. We understand that some European countries continue to buy Russian energy reserves or oil and gas. But in the 19 sanctions package, they clearly stated that that has to be ended soon. So we expect that the European countries understand that they have to stop it. The other part of the world, the South, of course, they are profiting on that very much, and they do not apparently have any other sources of supplies. And that aimed basically towards those countries in the first place. With the Europeans, we can talk and we have a political agreement in that, but some southern countries, in particular India, and I'm not talking about China. China is a separate case, of course. But from the point of view of the volume of those resources that they are getting from Russia, China and India are on top of the list.
There's a meeting scheduled, isn't there, between Marco Rubio, the American Secretary of State, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian Foreign Minister, in the next hour or so. That's going to be important, isn't it? We'll be watching to see whether, well, Rubio in particular, tones down, softens, draws back from the kind of words that President Trump was using.
No, I don't think so. I mean, of course he can do that, but I expect from Rubio to send this message directly to Lavrov. Rubio has to reiterate what Trump said and emphasize the importance and the validity of that statement. So if he goes like, diminishing the impact that that statement had on Ukraine in the first place, I don't like this to happen. So I expect the continuation of this narrative, this rhetoric, and that Russia will understand that Trump now is serious.
Yes, of course it is an interpretation and not an uncommon one, Ambassador, that when President Trump said he wanted to see Ukraine regain all of its lost territories, to liberate all of the areas of Ukraine, he was also saying pretty clearly that's your job, that is Europe's job, it's not America's job, and it's possible that could be rather underlined by Rubio too.
We knew that without President Trump saying that. But if Trump said that, we expect that Trump will participate in that effort.
Yeah.
That's the main point.
All right, Ambassador, really good to have you on. Thank you. Thank you so much. Can we just essentially dispense with the idea that Ukraine retaking the whole of that country is a feasible option?
I would say in the sort of the short to medium term, yes, because of what would be required to do that. I think it's a genuinely open-ended question if you viewed this as an incredibly long-term conflict. I mean, I know that sounds fantastical.
No. Well, in the span of history, anything can happen, but there's no no remotely visible route to that.
But in the near term, no, and that is because Russian forces are quite well entrenched in some of those areas. I mean, obviously they or their proxies have been in parts of the Donbass for more than 10 years now. Crimea has been fortified, but more to the point, the two mechanisms for doing that are directly assaulting them, moving forward with ground forces. And the Ukrainians haven't really built up. They're not in a position at the moment to launch a kind of offensive to do that. And the other would be to inflict such damage on the Russian economy and military such that the Russians chose to withdraw.
Yeah.
Because they didn't think it was viable in the long term to hold on to them. And of course, at the moment, the Russians are betting that they will outlast Ukraine and its international supporters rather than the other way around.
Now, what about the President Trump assertion that Russia was a paper tiger? I mean, I'll leave it at that. Give me your thoughts on that.
Well, this is all relative. Russia has demonstrated over the past 3 years that it certainly hadn't achieved the kind of modernization of its capabilities and improvements in military sophistication that some, either in government or in the academic and think tank community, had assumed based on observing its spending and programs over the years running up to 2022. So, it didn't look as good as we thought it did, and scratched beneath the surface enormous problems there, particularly with corruption and readiness and lots of other things. On the other hand, what it's doing at the moment is not really bothering with the quality of its assault infantry. It's using a combination of mass, brute force, willingness to take pain, and some advancements to basically grind its way forward. I do think it is important that it's not actually sensible to view the Russian military as one homogenous bloc.
Yes.
Parts of their ground forces really are developing and learning. They still have quite capable air forces, although they've underperformed in this war. And their maritime forces, particularly their submarine forces, are actually free to do things elsewhere.
Okay, a little later on in the programme, I'm going to turn to President Trump's comments where he suggested he would support the shooting down of Russian jets that invaded NATO airspace. On that question, Matthew, is it your assumption that if it came to NATO in armed conflict with Russia in the air over the NATO border, for example, the NATO European allies could simply not expect material military support from America? Question as simple and as bold as that. Would you share that view?
It depends on the time frame. And I think I agree with your previous speakers who tend towards the skeptical or cynical on whether or not this is President Trump, if you like, downplaying expectations that he will fix this problem.
Yes.
And can't you, Europe, deal with it as a paper tiger? I think if we had some kind of conflict, some clash in the near term, we would still expect the significant US military presence in Europe to be involved in some way. They still provide airborne surveillance. They still have enormous, combat power, relatively speaking, in and around Europe. And actually, in spite of fears that, they are looking towards the Indo-Pacific, they haven't actually drastically reduced or pulled forces out of Europe yet. So I think we are still expecting, if something happened in the near term, US air power would still be there in some form or another. It's not unreasonable to expect Europe to step up and do more in its own defence. And that's what I think the NATO operation is about. And it is worth noting that in any future conflict with Russia, NATO air power, and by that we often mean US air power, is critical.
So at this stage, until the American presence is diminished or reshaped or withdrawn, if we're talking about shooting down Russian jets, straying over, not straying because that implies an accidental crossing of the border, invading space, then we're talking about American jets, because there still are American jets in the NATO European space.
Potentially, although if you look at the way they're running the operation, in many cases, the combat air patrols, as it's known, or the quick reaction alert, is being performed by European militaries who are obviously quite keen to demonstrate they've still got a capability. So it would actually depend on timing and who is up in the air at any given time.
Okay. All right. Matthew Saville from RUSI, thank you so much.